Welcome back to another episode of the Heritage Month on Air series. And of course, the Heritage Month on Air series is both on Citi TV and 97.3 Citi FM. And it's sponsored by Miss Cookie Spices. Miss Cookie Spices, no peeling, no blending, just scoop and cook. My name is David Kwekusechi. When we are back from this short break, we'll get right into the conversation. Ago. All right, welcome back from that break. Now we're going to get right into the conversation for today. The key events leading up to 1924. Now, 1924 is a very important year, as you're going to find out shortly. Historian Kweku Dako Ankara is going to take us right into the conversations. All the politics shifting towards Accra, and Accra becoming the seat of hot action for Ghana. Yes. Yes. Welcome once again.
Thank you. So
yes.
This is a very interesting conversation, as we have gathered, Ashanti has been invaded, okay? And then the invasion did not lead to any annexation. It was just to let Ashanti know its place. And so because of this taming of Ashanti, the British were able in 1876 to turn the Gold Coast into their colony by order in council. So Gold Coast became tentatively a colony of the British in 1876.
Okay.
And so from the 1876, they started, the Supreme Court of Gold Coast came into action following the operationalization in 1877. And then
when you say Gold Coast, let's remind our viewers that you're not referring to the entire space of Ghana as it exists.
Yes, of course.
We're referring to the southern belt.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to explain further. So the first group of people, let's say from Axim all the way through Sefi, all the way through Asan, Wasan, all the way through Achim, Equiapim, all the way through Adan, Accra, all the way through Volta. At that time, the Anglos and others have not come in yet.
Okay.
So over the years, British signed different treaties, which brought about 1888. They are signed various treaties with the Anglo group, the Kru area people, and so on to become part of it. Okay, at the Kru is not part of, up to the towns below Ho.
Okay.
So all the Anglo enclaves, has become part of it. And then the Vedome people were not part.
Okay.
Then also when you come to the Ada areas, Kowu people, for example, signed the treaty late in 1887 thereabout, before they became part of the Gold Coast.
Okay.
So those are the Gold Coast I'm talking about. So this became the colony, and it is the first set of people, the Accra, the Fanti, the Wasan, and those people who helped the British to invade were the first people to become the Gold Coast colony.
Okay.
And afterwards, these other ones also came in, as I've explained. So British colonial authorities started extending to this community. And so by 1878, the governor at the time came out with what is called Native Jurisdiction Ordinance. This Native Jurisdiction Ordinance also was for the British to rule by incorporating the chiefs as the agent within the concept of the indirect rule. This 1878 one, which was just for about some few 15 chiefs, was then spread by when Dr. Samuel Rowe became the governor. And then in 1883, he came out with the Native Jurisdiction Ordinance that incorporated all other areas under it. Despite the protestation by the Gold Coast educated elite, led by Joseph Rena Maxwell, that it was wrong and is putting people under the power of chiefs as well as colonial authorities when they don't have that right to do so. The British went ahead and promulgated the ordinance anyway, thereby forcing the British rules and law over all these territories as it is, because they are part of their colony.
Okay.
Over the years, the British made attempts to also incorporate other areas, and then this led to a sort of what is called nationalist agitation. Mind you, in 1867, when the Senate Committee came out that the British want to get away from all their colonial properties on the Gold Coast, the Fantis have founded Fanti Confederation. And that Fanti Confederation leading members have been arrested. And as a result, the Confederation died.
Okay.
So when finally in 1876 we became a colony, the same agitation started brewing from the people that the 1844 agreement, they did not give British right, so that they go back on it and use it to create an order in council in 1874 and roll it out in 1876 to enable Gold Coast to become a colony.
Yeah.
So they started agitating. And this agitation found in what is called the cultural nationalist sentiment. They started writing books and other things about the importance of Gold Coast natives, their histories of origin, their educational achievements, places that they've been, and so on. So the educated elite started writing. In Accra, Bannerman started writing, what's the name? Christian Randolph wrote. Among the Cape Coast educated elite, J.B. Annaman started writing, Reverend A.W. Parker was writing, G.J.P. Brown was writing, Kesiri Hayford was writing, and John Mensah Saba was writing. John Mensah Saba even had to gather all the, what is called Gold Coast or Fanti customary law of all the practices to prove to the Europeans that before they came,
there was already
a customary law. Kesiri Hayford wrote about the Gold Coast native institutions to show that there were very important native structures which they were used to rule the people, and it was democratic. So all these writings shaped the mind. Thus, when in 1894, the colonial government introduced the land bill to alienate land, to bring sanity into the concession, that the disparities in the concession or the kind of agitation that has bedeviled the concession sector. Many people chiefs were giving out their land to concession companies, the European oligopolies. And this was creating a lot
as far back as 1890?
As far as 1890.
Wow.
So the British had wanted to come in to sanitize the system, but with also an ulterior motive of owning the lands themselves. And this was heavily resisted by the Infante Amembu Feku, which has been created in 1887. Okay? The Amembu Feku was a cultural nationalist organization. But because of the land bill, they quickly transmogrified to become the Aborigines Right Protection Society. Okay? Which is ARPS. So in 1897, when Governor Maxwell tried to re-amended the original 1894 Crown Land Bill into a land bill ordinance in 1897, the Gold Coast educated elite, led by the lawyers, immediately took charge of the situation and tried to attack the obnoxious nature of that 1897 bill, which give right to the Queen of England to own the lands of the Gold Coast in lieu of the people, which was wrong. So they fought against this thing, writing that since time immemorial, land on the Gold Coast has belongs to the people themselves or the chief, with the chief as custodians. So these arguments were really powerfully made, not both on the Gold Coast and then in England.
Okay.
And they were able to overcome the issue of the land agitation. When this thing was won, so at that time, Cape Coast was the center or the political hotbed of the Gold Coast at the time. Almost all the lawyers, those from Accra, Thomas Hatton Mills, who is the third Accra lawyer, John Glover Addo, Charles James Bannerman, C.J. Bannerman, all of them were practicing in Cape Coast. That's why the fact that they come from Accra, because Cape Coast was then the home of the legal practice.
Okay.
So all of them were there, and that is why ARPS had the best of the educated elites of the Gold Coast, all arguing against the land bill at the time. Okay, so when they defeated it in 1911, the British went back and came out with what is called the Crown Forest Bill. This time saying that all the forest that is unoccupied should also belong to the Queen of England. And this was, so they argued that upon the defeat of the Land Bill of 1897, they are now reintroducing the Land Bill through the back door and then decorating it as the Forest Crown Bill just to get opportunity to own the land. And this one too was heavily fought against, and they also won the case just as they won in 1897. So this period, you can see that Cape Coast was the political hotbed where all these arguments were being made. Then over the period, okay, Takoradi, the WAF was developed, has been developed. So there was the need for people, and then there was a mahogany concession that was also occurring there. Then you have the Ankobre riverbeds, and then the Seshi areas, which is the food basket, producing a lot of things. This time, not coming through Cape Coast and Elmina, but straight through Takoradi WAF that has been developed for future Abo projects. So most of the lawyers moved from Cape Coast and went to Axim and Sekendi to practice. So the Sekendi was also taking away the importance of Cape Coast in terms of as an economic center. The commerce moved from Cape Coast to Sekendi, Axim, Sekendi and Axim areas. Then Accra as a capital was also developing. Urbanization was taking place. So many lawyers also from Cape Coast started retracing their footsteps back home. C.J. Bannerman went back to Accra. Thomas Hatton Thomas Hatton Mills returned to Accra. Glover Addo returns to Accra. Miguel Ribeiro returned to Accra. Francisco Ribeiro returned to Accra. All of them started returning to Accra. So Cape Coast lost all these important. Even J. Kesin Hayford went to Sekendi, okay? Kuse moved to Accra and so on. So Cape Coast started losing. It was leaving the space to Kobina Sechi, say Akukosa and few others to operate in Cape Coast. So that is how the changes came about as a result of urbanization, commerce, and trade at the time. Cape Coast lost in this regard to Sekendi Takoradi and Accra emerging as the new centers of political activism in Gold Coast.
We're talking about 1924 and the events leading up to, you know, the various political changes and the politics shifting from Cape Coast being the hotbed of politics to Accra being the center. So, Kweku, you've given us a whole plethora of different events from 74 through 76, 88 of 1888, and so on and so on. Now we're in the 1924. What are some of the key developments of politics that we should take notice of?
Very good. So what happened was that when the major political players moved to Sekendi and Takoradi, what happened was that there was also the idea of how to get independence in the minds of the educated elite started changing. For instance, J.E.K. Hayford realized that the ARPS alone is a Gold Coast-centered party. And from his Pan-Africanist thought, with Dr. Akiwande Savage, who was a Nigerian medical doctor in Cape Coast, they formed, the two of them, Jojo, and then they came to realization that if Africans can get their independence, there is the need for the four West African British territory to come together to form a political organization which will be effective to fight against British colonial power.
Which four are you referring to?
I'm referring to the Gambia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Ghana.
Okay.
These are the four major British territories, colonies on the Gold Coast. So, Kesin Hayford led with the idea, and the committees were formed in all the four colonial territories. And then they came together to form an organization called National Congress of British West Africa, NCBWA. In 1918, the committees founded. In 1920, they met in Accra, and then they founded the organization and chose a Ghanaian, or the Gold Coaster, Thomas Hatton Mills, as its president. And immediately, Kesin Hayford led the delegation to England. And within their demands were that they should create the legislative council, they should make a way for the educated elite to represent the people instead of the chiefs, because most of the chiefs don't have the education. So they should be the representative of the people. To their education, must be improved in all the West African territory. And they made a demand for a university to be a brand new university to be situated at Kumasi. They made the demand for it. But when they went there and they were to meet the colonial secretary to give the recommendation, Nanasi Ofori-Atta denounced them that they were not the right people to lead any African because they, the chief alone, are the natural rulers of the people. And they alone have the right because the idea of an educated person who has no territory to rule has no right to go and give. As a result, his argument was bought because he was in cahoots. He's an apostle of indirect rule. And whatever he says is seen as the sanctions of the law because of his collaboration with the British colonial authorities. So Guggisberg, upon hearing this, transmitted the information to Sir Hugh Clifford, who has also been on the Gold Coast before. And then they sent a message to the colonial office that Kesiri Hayford and his delegation shouldn't be allowed because they don't represent the people. As a result, they were not received. And their idea of getting a university for the Gold Coast and opportunities for the educated elites to be representative in the Legislative Council was quashed. So for people like Nigerian writer Apollos Inwawa, he says that this really undermined the education effort. The move by Ofori-Atta undermined the education effort in the Gold Coast, and it will take additional 20 years before the movement for better education, higher education in the Gold Coast will come to existence.
At that time, Ofori-Atta, who was he in the general mix of what was Ghana at that time? Who was he?
He was a chief of Achim Ebuakwa, but the Gold Coast Legislative Council.
But he is Ofori-Atta the first.
He is Ofori-Atta the first.
Yes.
So within the framework of what is called the Gold Coast Legislative Council, as I explained earlier, chiefs form the core part of the indirect rule.
Yes.
I told you from the Native Jurisdiction Ordinance.
Yes.
So all the Native Jurisdiction Ordinance allow chiefs to create courts and hear cases and so on. So they had become the representative of the people at the Legislative Council with no educated elites.
Yes.
Even though some of the educated elites that were supposed to go to the Legislative Council, they were appointed by the governor.
Okay.
You get the point? So the governor chooses you when you see that as for you, you are malleable or you have some knowledge that can be taken, then they appoint you today.
Yeah.
But the chiefs were directly appointed to also be part of the Legislative Council. And that was something that Kesiri Hayford was fighting against, that the chiefs do not have the, how do you call it, the education, the government, okay, of traveling and having knowledge in law to represent the people. So Kesiri Hayford and his people were the new educated elite that have emerged with Western education. Better like all the Europeans you can talk about.
But wasn't so the Nana Ofori-Atta you're referring to, was he not the Nana Se
Ofori-Atta?
Good. So but he is educated and he was also a chief.
So I'm coming to the point. So his argument, because he's educated, that is why he's arguing that the educated people were not. So here his argument is based on tradition and customs.
Okay.
And Kesiri Hayford was also a person who was arguing from the changing the modernity, the kind of governance system that was going on. That had nothing to do with chieftaincy, but modern governance system. So you could see that Kesiri Hayford was futuristic. He saw the change, a change that the traditional rulers knew that they are going to lose their power because for the first time, people are going to leave them and follow the educated elites. And that is something at the time he could not allow. And he was right to state at that time that the chief, Nanasi Ofori-Atta was right to state at that time the chief were then the natural rulers and the leaders of the people. However, the counter argument is that the rulers must also rule with the consent of the people. So if the people say they don't like something, then the chief must listen to them. It is not a dictatorial authority when it comes to chieftaincy. You rule for what your people want, not what you want. I get that point. So Kesiri Hayford, who understood the native institution, for he has written a whole book, Gold Coast Native Institution, and explained explicitly the role and the democratic nature of the chieftaincy system, was able to argue that times are changing.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're supposed to do. This is the era of reading. This is the era of professionals. This is the era of the elites, lawyers, medical doctors, who are far more ahead of the chiefs in terms of knowledge. So that those are the people who can go into the Legislative Council and assault the pillars of British imperialism and colonialism in Gold Coast. So this was a critical point that Kesile Hayford made. Are you getting the point?
Yes.
And so as a result of Kesile Hayford's demand, the Gold Coast came out. The critical point in 1824 was that they came out, the British Colonial Authority came out with Municipal Corporation Ordinance of 1924.
Okay.
This is where Accra became very critical. The Municipal Corporation Ordinance was talking about creation of a new constituencies or legislative centers in the urban centers of Accra, Cape Coast, and Sekondi Takoradi. And this time, elections were going to be run by the educated elites to represent the people of these areas in the Legislative Council. This was the demand Kesile Hayford had made in 1920. 4 years later, the governor saw that what the guy was saying was right. And then this law was thrown out. And Kobina Citi fought against this law that he is not looking for only people in Accra, other communities, bigger towns, okay? So bigger towns like, let's say, Winneba, okay? Bigger towns like, say, Axim, bigger towns like, say, Dunkwa, bigger towns like, say, Ekwapong. All of them should have representatives to be there. So he was asking for a larger body. But unfortunately, he was ignored. And Kesile Hayford said, if you ask for something and you get a little of it, you take it, and then you fight on. So as a result of that, the Municipal Corporation Bill of 1924 was passed. And then the first election was to be held in Accra. And this led to formation of political parties in Accra. So in Accra, Augustus William Kojo Thompson, whose name is now named after Kojo Thompson Road, formed his famous party called Gam and B Party. Okay. And then Dr. Frederick Nanka Bruce, Akila Pasoya, and others also founded Accra Ratepayers Association.
Okay.
And then these two parties were to engage in the 1927 Legislative Assembly election, municipal election in Accra. When they were going in, there was a differences in them. As a result, the Gam party separated into two.
Okay.
And then lawyer Kote Papafiu founded Asre Kouru Party into 8. And they entered into the election with the Ratepayers Association led by John Glover Addo. And then they went to the elections, and John Glover Addo won the election for the first time in Accra to represent the Accra. So when we talk about the first member of parliament for Accra, it is John Glover Addo in 1927. Okay. In Sekondi, J.E. Kesile Hayford also contested with the Caribbean lawyer called George James Christian in Sekondi with Crowther Nicole, and then he also won from Sekondi and represented the Sekondi people in Gold Coast legislature. So he is also the first member of parliament for Sekondi, J.E. Kesile Hayford. In Cape Coast, Kobina Citi says no. If the British are not going to add more constituencies or more places for the election, then Cape Coast is not going to have any elections. And he took them to court. So in 1927, there was no election in Cape Coast. A year later, when he has traveled, the Cape Coast election was organized. And say Akukosa, Kwabena Akukosa, who later became the first Chief Justice of Ghana, ran on the ticket in Cape Coast for Ratepayers Association and won the seat and became the first member of parliament. And he was on the seat for 1927 to 1940.
I see.
So that was the development. So at all that time, the Legislative Council was in Accra, as it is still in Accra, as now called Parliament. Wow. So all these people had to move from their various areas and come to Accra.
Accra.
And
Where
so
the parliament was.
Where the legislative council
is. Okay.
And this led to the political, economic, and all other social relations moving from the other areas into Accra to become a center of power.
Wow. Wow, wow. Thank you very much. And that we want to say a big thank you to historian Kweku Dako Ankra for leading us down this path, how 1924 became a critical year as far as Ghana politics is concerned. This has been another wonderful episode of the Heritage on Air series on Citi TV and 97.3 Citi FM. Heritage Month on Air series is brought to you by Miss Cookie Spices. No peeling, no blending, just scoop and cook. My name is David Kwekusechi. Next time we'll be back with another episode of the Heritage on Air series. I want to say a big thank you to EAK Clothing for my beautiful kaftan today. Thank you very much for listening and watching.